And my son did not deserve to be killed. We had spent my birthday together just the 31st of December, and I instructed him to take the car to San Francisco to watch the fireworks. And he did just that. He bought. Never did I expect to receive a phone call that said that we had been shot. And at first I thought, oh my God, what happened? And his fiance told me that the police had shot him. And I said, well, what happened? And I raced to the hospital and still didn't have a clear picture of what had happened to my son. And the next day, several people had videotaped what had happened to him. And so they put it on YouTube and gave it to the local news media. And the media began to play it on television, what exactly had happened to my son. One of the officers who had came up was acting very aggressive, and my son knew his rights, and he seen one of his friends being mistreated by the officer, so he stood up and told the officer he wanted to talk to someone who was in charge. And the officer pushed him back down and told him to shut that up and do some racial epithets towards him. And my son said, we want to talk to somebody. Then another officer came up, the one who shot and killed my son, and pointed his taser at my son. So the last picture on my son's camera was a picture of an officer pointing his taser at him. And this is the same officer who said he thought he was pulling his gun. Thought he was pulling his taser, but he also didn't pull his gun. But the first thing that really happened during that transition of killing my son was that the whole system began to try to cover up the action of what the officer had did. They first tried to say, well, he thought my son was going for a gun. And then when my son did have a gun, they said, oh, he was resisting arrest. But yet my son is only about 170 pounds, and the officer who was on his neck was 260 pounds, and the officer who was on his feet was 235 pounds. And so when they flipped my son to the ground, they had flipped him on one of his friend's legs, and my son was telling him, and his friend was saying, he's on my leg, he's on my leg. And so the next thing you know, the officer got up and pulled his gun and shot my son in the back. My son looked up at the officer and said to him, you shot me. I have a 4-year-old daughter. You shot me. And my son was pronounced dead at the next morning. So what is justice? We went to court the first time in California history. The officer was charged at first with second-degree murder, and the jury found and convicted him of involuntary manslaughter with a gun enhancement charge. But yet, which the gun enhancement charge would have given an additional 10 years. But the judge said, oh, I made a mistake in giving instructions to the jury. So I'm going to throw out the gun enhancement charge, which would be an extra 10 years. And I'm going to also give the officer time served for being a good officer and give him credit served, rather, for being a moral good officer while he was incarcerated in county jail. And the judge wanted up giving him 11 months in county jail for the killing of my son. So what is justice? Was that justice? Totally. No, it wasn't justice in my eyesight. So why do I still fight? Because my son should not have been killed by the officer. And I've worked to help and to bring to light the issues that are taking place in our community. Our black and brown women are being killed at such a high rate. And we as citizens have to change our mindset. Because we've been taught for so long that officers are basically more righteous or more perfect than we are, so we've been taught to believe everything that they say. But I stopped by just to say to you today that they lie just like we can lie. They steal just like we steal. They kill just like civilians kill. And because they kill, they should be held accountable for their actions. My son would have been on death row or in jail for 25 life. And I believe that the officer who killed my son should have been on death row or been in jail for 25 life. We have to fight to make sure that officers are held accountable for their actions. And the only way that they're going to be held accountable for their actions is if you and I continue to let other people know that officers are not as righteous as we think they are. Am I saying all officers are bad? No, I'm not saying that. But the ones that are bad, they need to be identified and they need to be taken off the force. And the only way that's going to happen is if you and I work together to bring this to the forefront, like we're doing with Eric Garner's case, like they're doing with Michael Brown's case, like they've done with Trayvon Martin's case, like they've done with Alan Rufus' case, Oscar Grant's case, all these cases that we have been seeing escalated, lives are being lost. And the only way that it's going to change is if you and I work and go up to Congress and say that we're not going to take it anymore. We are going to stand for what is right, and lives matter. Whether the life is black, whether the life is brown, whether the life is white, lives matter. And my son's life matters. Protesting in a little while. That's what's being said. And so we have to make sure that when we are protesting, that we're protesting so that the nation can feel it, and not just the communities where we're breaking windows, but the nation needs to feel it. And so you and I can make that difference. And I just once again thank you. And I want to say that Oscar's life matters.